Yo guys, what is up? It is Alex or Black Eye here, and today I'm just gonna make a little video. This is gonna be a discussion talking about how I believe you should build as an ADC. This isn't gonna go over specific builds because builds are constantly changing. This is just gonna be a video more of my thought process when building as an ADC. I will talk about some specific builds, but just remember that they won't always be relevant. But this is mostly just gonna be my thought process on how to build as an ADC. So first I'm gonna go over the basics. So there are two builds that people generally go as an ADC, and this is as an ADC, not like if you're playing an a hunter in solo or jungle, because I know like Uller jungle has some weird build with like hydras and whatnot. But this is specifically if you're playing an ADC as a hunter. So there's penetration and crit chance. So penetration, so if you're not sure what to go, look at the other team, and they usually aren't like this, but if they're tankier than normal, then you're obviously going to want to go penetration because it works better against people that are tankier. If the other team is squishier, such as they have like a mage in solo or something, then you could get away with going crit chance. But most of the time there's going to be one of every single class in the game, so one assassin, one mage, one ADC, one guardian, one warrior. So then you're going to have to decide what to build. And honestly, I don't think crit is good as of right now. As of this video is being made in 4.14 on console, 4.15 on PC, I don't think crit is good. Because if you're in a team fight, then what's going to happen is the jungler and the warrior are going to dive you, or the jungler and the solo laner are going to dive the backline. And you need to get through them before you can start hitting the squishier targets. And crit chance is only really effective on squishier targets. But the warrior is going to be diving you, and that warrior is going to be tanky as shit. So you're going to need some penetration to get through him. And honestly, like, pen isn't even that bad against squishier targets. Like, against the mid or the other ADC, it's only going to take like between 5 and 7 basics to kill them, versus crit, it would be like 2 to 4. And like, that seems like a big difference, but if you're at the point where the front line's dead, like the warrior in the jungle, then everyone else on your team is going to be swarming the backline, CCing them. You don't need to 100 to 0 them into autos, because your mage is going to be on them too, your guardian's going to be on them, everybody's going to be on them, so they're going to die just as fast if you had crit. Yes, there are specific cases where crit would be better, but in most cases, I believe penetration is better. Now also, I want to talk about lifesteal. If you want to go lifesteal, you can. I really don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's the best build. So in either build, crit or pen, you could trade out something for an Aussie, maybe like an Ichabod for an Aussie, or trade out like your Shifter's Shield or your Transcendence for a Devourer's Gauntlet. But just remember that you're going to have to be giving something up to go with lifesteal. Again, I don't think lifesteal is bad. I don't think it's that good either, but as of, I think 4.16, Devo's Gauntlets is getting, or not patches, getting buffed, and I think that will be a staple again, just because of it. Like, the buff is really, really good. So now I'm going to talk about SPL builds and online builds. So what a lot of people do is they'll watch SPL, and they will see, oh, well, this team won, and this hunter had this build, therefore the build is good. That's not necessarily the case. I saw a Rama build Bluestone Mace, and they started with 1 health potion. That was their start. And I don't think that is good in every scenario. I think that was good in that game based on both team comps and the fact that they're pro players. Like, they've been practicing this 6 to 8 hours every single day. But if you go into ranked or casuals, and a good player notices you're building Bluestone Mace, they're going to try to pressure the crap out of you, because they're going to try to burn your resources while you have a bunch of resources. So if they keep poking you out, you're going to have like 1 health, 1 mana potion, 2 health, 2 mana potions, while the Bluestone Mace Rama is going to have half health with nothing. And then you can just steamroll them. You can just keep poking them out until they're forced to back early. But most of the SPL stuff I've seen, it's like, hasn't been too weird, especially on hunters, because hunter builds are pretty straightforward. But if you see some weird stuff like that, you got to think about why it worked instead of just saying, oh, it worked, it must be good. So now let's talk about online builds. So Smite Guru, Smite Fire, Tier Monster. I'm not sure if Smite Guru has builds. I think it does, but those are all pretty good places to go if you're starting out as a hunter and you're not sure how to build. You could just get some guidance there. But what I see people do is they'll find a build they like and they will build that for every single game. and that's not that good. Like, let's say that this guy finds an insane crit build, he goes 20-2 with it, and he's like, holy shit, this is the best build ever, and he's like, has, you know, rage, deathbringer, all that good shit, and then he gets into a game where it's like 2 warriors, a guardian, a mage, and an ADC. He's gonna get freaking dicked on if he builds crit chance. So you just gotta remember that if you find a build you like, it might not necessarily be the correct build in every situation, but most of the time online builds are the way to go if you're new to this and you're not sure how to build by yourself. Honestly, you could just Google Season 4 Rama build, Season 4 Chiron build, and usually like the first 3 links will be something that's pretty decent. But now let's go into more specifics. So, like I said earlier, I don't think you should cut and paste builds, and this is like my thought process with how I build. So, before the game starts, I'm looking at the team saying, okay, what do I want to build? Crit versus pen. And usually like 90% of the time it's pen, but let's say they have a mage in solo, or their support was stubborn and didn't want to go a guardian, so they went like hell and they didn't build defense, then I would probably go crit. But most of the time I'm gonna go pen. Most of the time when there's like one of each class on the opposing team, I don't go crit, I still go pen. But there are some cases where I do think crit is correct, especially if there's like a lot of immobile characters, like say it's Anubis mid, Artemis carry, then I might consider going crit just because they're not going to be moving a whole ton. It'll be easy to hit them. You can 100-0 them pretty quickly. But a lot of mistakes I see people make is like they'll build crit when there's a Geb and a Ho Yi. And if you just knew their passive, you would know that crit's terrible. Like Ho Yi's passive is he can't get crit, or he can only get crit once every 3 seconds. So you crit him once, and then you're just going to be hitting like 200, 250, versus you could be hitting 300, 350 every basic. In Geb, he just takes only 25% crit damage instead of 100%. So you're not going to be hitting at all on Geb. You're going to be hitting like 125s on a Geb. Or versus if you build pen, you'll be hitting like 175, 200, 250, etc. So once you've decided, you need to figure out what build you should go. And honestly, that's just keeping up with the meta and just changing specific things that don't seem right. And I had a big problem with this with the Shifters build. The Shifters build was Warrior Boots, Shifter Shield, Oboe, Xe, Kins, Titan's Bane. I think that was the build. And the problem with this was that I was trying it out on Rama, I was trying it out on Izanami, trying it out on Artemis, and those gods have auto attack steroids. And what I noticed is that, like, instead of the 70% attack speed buff I'd get, I would only be getting like 30-40% because my attack speed would be 2.2, 2.1 at full build. So what did I do? I changed some things. I said, okay, well, I don't need this Oboe. So I sold the Oboe, my attack speed went down to 1.6, 1.7, which seems low, but if you're an Artemis, that's an 80% attack speed increase. So it's going to shoot back up to 2.3, 2.4. Or if you're Rama, I think it's, I've played so much Rama, I still don't know this. I think it's like 60%, like 50% around there. Like, so if you have 1.6, 1.7, that is still a 2.1 to 2.2 after you use your steroid, which is fine. Like, that's a good amount of attack speed, you don't need more. Now, that build, the build I just talked about, the Shifters Oboe build, that was fine if you didn't have an auto attack steroid, but people were saying, oh no, if you're building pen, this is the build that you want to go. Which is not okay, because different hunters build differently. Like, Artemis isn't the same as Chiron. So if you want to build pen and build the Shifters build, you're going to need to change it a bit to make it fully optimal. What I've been finding a lot of success with as recently is Warrior Boots, Transcendent, Shifters, Executioner, Kins, and then either Titan's Bane or Crusher. That is on ability-based gods. And my thought process through that build, like that build seems really weird, right? The first 3 items have 0 attack speed. But my thought process is, okay, well if I'm ability-based, then I'm going to want to build like I'm ability-based, because abilities on hunters are a lot better in the early game than they are in the late game. Unless, like, actually no, I think in all cases, abilities are a lot better on hunters early game than they are late game. So my thought process was, okay, well, let's build Warrior Boots, because the power, you're going to be using abilities. Transcendence, power, mana, going to be using abilities. Shifter Shield, power, going to be using abilities. And then you start going into Executioner and Kin size, because it'll start hitting mid to late game, so you'll start building more auto attack based. And honestly, people have questioned that, but I found a ton of success with that build. Now the only reason that like I wouldn't go that is if you're just getting stomped on. So like you're 0-3, like 6-7 minutes in, you're not going to want to try stacking Transcendence. You're not going to want to try to build Shifter Shield. You're just going to want to go into your Ichabod, your Executioner. Might want to skip Kins because it's a bit expensive. Get like a Crusher or something. But like that was my thought process through it. Like that's how I have started building ability-based hunters. Because I recognized that abilities are better early than late. So let's build like I'm building an ability-based hunter early game, but then start going into the ADC, like actual like a auto attack based hunters late game. And I've found so much success with that. It's been crazy. Now that build that I just gave you, that wouldn't work on like a Rama or an Artemis because they're not like completely ability based. Like Chiron has 4 damaging abilities, including his 3. People underestimate how much damage his 3 does. It does a good bit. So it's going to be really good on Chiron, or it's going to be really good on Neith. But it wouldn't be good on like Rama or Artemis. But basically the point I'm trying to make is just find like a build that's considered meta or good, and then change it to adapt your character or adapt to the team you're facing. And if you don't need to, you think it's fine, then fine, just keep that build. But just remember that if your attack speed's like 2.2 and you're a Rama or an Izanami or an Artemis, then something's wrong, you know? Or if you're building, you copied a crit build and there's like 4 warriors on the other team, then just remember that something's wrong. So now I'm going to talk about specific items I think are super underrated and need to be considered. The first one being Crusher. I fucking love this item. I freaking love this item. It's got power, it's got pen, it's got cooldown, it's got attack speed. Like, that alone is just like perfect for hunters. And I found like, it's just been my go-to pen item. Like, especially on there's just been a really like standard build, like a crit build that's really standard. It's like Warrior Boots, Ichabod, Executioner, Rage, Deathbringer, and then your 6th item is just kind of awkward, because if you go another attack speed item, you're going to have a lot of attack speed, and your steroid won't do a lot. If you go a pen item, your attack speed is going to be too slow, but with Crusher, it's just like, it perfectly fits the situation. It doesn't give you enough attack speed to where your steroid won't do anything, but it'll give you like just the right amount. And it also gives you pen and power, whereas your build your build doesn't have any pen in it. It has Rage and Deathbringer and Executioner. Like, you're not going to do anything to towers, but with that 15 pen, you're going to do like just enough to where it'll be fine. The other one I want to talk about is Runic Shield. I don't think Runic Shield should be a staple, but I think it should definitely be considered, especially when the team is like more magical based. If they're running like 4 magicals or 3 magicals, then you might want to consider it. I still wouldn't build it if there were only 3 magicals, but I would build it if there were 3 magicals and one of their, like, let's say they have 3 magical and a warrior support, and the warrior is like, he doesn't do that much damage. So I'm trying to think of a warrior that doesn't do a shit ton of damage. So like maybe if they had a Guan Yu support, then I would consider it, and that Guan Yu support has to be building full defense. Like if I see they have 3 magical, 2 physical, and their warrior is building like a hybrid, then I still wouldn't build it. But if they have 3 magical, their warrior support is building like straight defense, then I would consider a Runic Shield. I usually only build it in Conquest if they have 4 magical, and that's very, very rare, but it's still something to consider. Another weird item that I think should be considered building, or that should be considered, is Frostbound Hammer. And I know it got nerfed from 30% to 20%, but that 10% really doesn't make that much of a difference, especially if you already have a slow. And the gods that I consider it decent on would be Chiron, Artemis, and AMC, because they have a slow and they're pretty immobile. Well, except for Chiron, but Chiron can just bully the crap out of people with Frostbound, because you're going to slow them with your basics, you're going to slow them with your 2. And like with Artemis, who's pretty immobile, you use your 3, you hit them with Frostbound, they're going to be slowed, you're going to catch up to them. AMC, you use your honey on them, they're going to be slowed, hit them with your basic, they're going to be slowed even more, and you can keep up with them. Again, it's not good in every single scenario, but it's still something to consider. Now, one of my favorite builds that I consider just a meme build is crit with Frostbound and Poison Star. That is freaking AIDS, and I love it, and it's so much fun. But it's not a good build. It's just not. It's just so much fun, because they get slowed like 50%, like even 60, 70% if they have, or if you have a slow in your kit. Oh, it's so good. It's so AIDS. Now, that's just my thoughts on how you should build. But I'm gonna wrap this video up with a thought that I had with a friend, and that is, if you are going in the right direction, builds rarely matter. If you're building pen and you have a little bit of attack speed, a little bit of power, a little bit of pen, you're golden. If you're building crit, you have like a couple crit items, some attack speed, some power, you're golden. There isn't, if you build perfectly and the other player doesn't, that doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna win. At the end of the line, it comes down to who's gonna hit more basics, who's gonna hit more abilities. Like that tiny little difference in build is only gonna matter if you two are like evenly matched and you're like, and the gods are evenly matched. And that, and with that I mean like one god clearly doesn't counter another. It only comes down, like builds only really matter, like that tiny difference matters if you're evenly skilled and you're just playing like gods that aren't bad at matchups against each other. It's okay if your build isn't completely optimal, like let's say you built one item wrong, that's fine. Because if you're hitting more basics, hitting more abilities than the other ADC, then that's really all that matters. Like I'll see people all the time going, oh, why'd you go this item instead of this? Like usually I have a reason behind it, but in the long run it doesn't matter. Because either A, I'm hitting more basics, more abilities than the other ADC, or B, the other ADC is hitting more basics and more abilities than me. I don't think I've had a single game where I lost a fight that came down to my build. And like especially in casual is like people get so upset when you build wrong, but it's like one, it's freaking casuals, and two, the build doesn't matter if one opponent is clearly better than the others. And not saying the build like is completely obsolete. Like if you're trying to build crit and you're building like Poison Star and I don't know, Malice, then you're doing something wrong. But like, you know, if you're building crit and you build Rage Deathbringer and then I don't know, your last item is something weird like I don't know, like a Brawlers, and like that one last item doesn't really matter. Like you got the basics down, you built the two main crit items on Hunters, you're good. Like if you're trying to build Lifesteal and you build a Bloodforge instead of like a Devos or an Aussie, like that's not even that bad. Like yes, Devos or Aussie probably would have been better than Bloodforge, but like that's, in the end it's going to come down to who's hitting more basics, who's hitting more abilities. But yeah guys, that is my just thoughts on how I think Hunters should be built. If you disagree or agree, leave a comment, and yeah, see you guys later.